The cathedral doors swing open, and for a moment all you hear is the rustle of silk against stone. Then you see her, a child drowning in cloth of gold so heavy it bends her spine. She's 14 years old, and she's walking toward a man who could be her father. Her hands are shaking. Someone behind you whispers that she cried through the entire night. You watch her take another step, and another, and you realize with a cold certainty that you're not witnessing a wedding. You're watching a sacrifice dressed in ceremony and blessed by every authority that claims to love her. This is the story of Isabelle de Valois, and it's worse than you think. I'm genuinely curious. Where are you watching from? It amazes me that a tragedy from 5 centuries ago can still reach across oceans and languages to find us all here, together, trying to understand what we're capable of doing to each other. The year is 1559, and Europe's most powerful kingdoms have been bleeding each other dry for generations. France and Spain, 2 empires so wealthy they can afford to burn through entire treasuries on wars that achieve nothing but graveyards. The Italian wars have consumed decades, swallowed armies, and left both nations financially exhausted. But pride doesn't negotiate, and kings don't apologize. So the diplomats gather in secret chambers to draft the Treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis. And they need something more binding than signatures on parchment. They need collateral. They need flesh. In a palace outside Paris, Isabelle de Valois is 13 years old and still plays with dolls. She embroiders with skill that makes her tutors smile. She speaks Latin fluently, plays the lute beautifully, and moves through her days in the kind of innocence that seems almost sacred. Her father is King Henry II of France. Her mother is Catherine de' Medici, who brought Florentine sophistication and banking wealth to the French crown. Isabelle has grown up surrounded by art, music, poetry, and the refined culture that makes the French court the envy of Europe. She has no idea that in rooms she'll never enter, men are calculating her value by the pound. The Treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis will end the wars, but peace demands a price that gold cannot pay. The negotiators, men who sleep soundly and eat well, decide that price will be a child. Specifically, a French princess delivered to the Spanish king as living proof that this alliance means something permanent. Isabelle de Valois, perfect in every measurement that matters to dynasties, becomes the obvious choice. She is young enough to mold, pure enough to verify, expendable enough to sacrifice. When they tell her, she doesn't understand at first. Marriage to Philip II of Spain. The words float through her mind like smoke. She's 13. She still races through gardens with her siblings. She still believes adults exist to protect children. But the servants whisper things that make her stomach turn. Philip is 32 years old, more than twice her age. His first wife died screaming in childbirth. The ladies in waiting speak in hushed tones about his melancholy, his cold devotion to duty, his court where laughter dies in corridors built from shadow. They whisper darker things too, about his illnesses, about appetites that destroyed his first wife long before labor killed her, about the Spanish Inquisition that burns people alive while Philip watches from balconies with a face like carved marble. Why me? She asks her father in a throne room that suddenly feels enormous and cold. He speaks about honor, duty, the sacred obligations of royal blood, the thousands of French soldiers who will live because she accepts this. He makes it sound reasonable. He makes it sound noble. What he doesn't say, what perhaps he cannot let himself think, is that he's trading his daughter's entire existence for a temporary ceasefire in a conflict that will resume the moment it becomes profitable. The transformation begins immediately, and it's more thorough than a 13-year-old can possibly comprehend. Her bright gowns disappear, replaced by severe black silk cut in the Spanish style. Heavy, restrictive, mourning clothes for a childhood that's being buried alive. The games stop. The laughter stops. Tutors arrive to teach her Spanish phrases that feel like stones in her mouth. Seamstresses measure her developing body with clinical precision, noting every curve, discussing her hips and breasts as if she's livestock being prepared for market. Every protocol lesson chips away at her natural spontaneity. How to walk with submission rather than confidence. How to speak with deference rather than personality. How to arrange her face in pious contentment while her heart breaks with terror. Then comes the cruelest lesson. In a chamber hung with dark tapestries, Lit by candles that throw dancing shadows like demons, Isabel stands trembling while strange men with cold hands examine her most intimate self. The verification of virginity, performed not in merciful privacy but before an audience of physicians, clerks, and Spanish ambassadors who watch with calculating eyes. This is no medical procedure. This is theater designed to humiliate, to break, to demonstrate that she no longer belongs to herself. They speak about her as if she cannot hear, discussing the shape of her pelvis, the development of her breasts, the tightness of membranes that will determine whether Spain accepts the merchandise. Their hands probe without gentleness. Their conclusions are recorded with the dispassion they might bring to examining a horse. When it ends, when the witnesses file out satisfied and the documents are signed, Isabel sits alone and weeps, not just from the physical violation but from the sudden terrible understanding that there is no sanctuary, no corner of her existence that remains beyond the reach of men who see her as equipment rather than human. The journey to Spain stretches like a funeral procession across countryside that grows stranger with every mile. At the border, at the river Bidasoa that separates France from Spain like a watery grave, comes the final severing. The ceremony is called the Exchange of the Princesses, which sounds almost festive until you understand what it means. Isabel must be stripped of every connection to her past. French ladies-in-waiting who have known her since childhood must stop at the river. These women who understand her fears, who remember when she was small, who love her as much as servants are permitted to love princesses. They cannot cross. Spanish women wait on the other side, strangers who will remake her in their image. French clothes that carry the scent of home must be abandoned. Even her undergarments, intimate things no one but her closest attendants have seen, must be replaced. French jewels disappear into boxes. The ring her mother gave her inscribed with love in French, confiscated. The locket containing her father's portrait, removed. Even the small wooden cross, blessed by her baptismal chaplain, replaced with Spanish religious artifacts blessed by priests she's never met. She crosses the bridge naked of everything that made her who she was, clothed only in Spanish silk that scratches against skin that remembers softer textures. With each step, another piece of Isabel de Valois dissolves into the current below. The Spanish delegation receives her with ceremony as cold as winter stone. Their smiles carry the warmth of diplomatic necessity rather than human welcome. The journey through Spain reveals landscape as different from France as another planet. Harsh brown earth under a sun that beats down like punishment. Villages appear less frequently, and when they do, the people stare at her with suspicion. She is forever foreign, potentially dangerous, certainly different. Spanish nobles escort her in carriages that feel like mobile prisons, discussing her in rapid Spanish they assume she cannot yet understand, debating whether she appears strong enough for frequent childbearing, whether her French blood might contaminate future heirs, whether her obvious terror suggests weakness or appropriate feminine submission. The Alcázar of Madrid rises before her like a fortress built by architects who believed beauty was synonymous with intimidation. This will be home, this maze of corridors where whispers die, where every footstep echoes like judgment, where windows seem designed to admit shadow rather than light. Philip II waits in the throne room, and Isabel's first sight of her husband-to-be steals what little breath she has left. 32 to her 14. Gaunt where she is soft, black-clad where she still dreams of color. His eyes hold no warmth, no curiosity about the girl who has traveled so far. He looks at her the way a craftsman examines a tool sent from another workshop, evaluating function, not form. When he speaks, his voice carries the flat tone of someone reading inventory. He welcomes her to Spain in phrases that sound rehearsed, expressing satisfaction with the alliance her presence represents. He does not ask about her journey, her family, her feelings. These things do not register as relevant. The Spanish court gathers to watch this first meeting, and Isabel can feel their assessment pressing down on her shoulders. They see her youth as either promising or concerning, depending on their calculations. Some whisper she appears too delicate for royal motherhood. Others note with satisfaction that her obvious innocence guarantees she comes uncontaminated. No one asks what she thinks, what she wants, what she fears. These considerations have no place in the careful choreography of dynastic alliance. The wedding unfolds with majesty that feels like mockery. The cathedral fills with nobles whose faces blur together. The bishop speaks Latin with Spanish pronunciation that sounds wrong to her French-trained ear. She wears a gown so heavy with gold thread and jewels she can barely stand. Every step toward the altar requires conscious effort, as if the dress itself understands she's walking toward destruction and wants to drag her backward. Philip waits with the expression he might wear reviewing tax ledgers, dutiful attention to business at hand. When she speaks the vows in carefully rehearsed Spanish, each word is a small death of her French identity. The cathedral erupts in celebration that sounds hollow. The nobles applaud, the choir sings, the bells ring, but Isabel hears only invisible chains locking into place around her throat. That night in the marriage bed, whatever remained of childhood dies violently. The chamber has been prepared with silk hangings embroidered with Spanish and French symbols, suggesting unity that exists nowhere but in political fantasy. Religious paintings watch from walls with eyes that hold no compassion. Philip approaches consummation with grim duty. There is no tenderness, no recognition that the body beneath his contains a soul deserving consideration. He performs with mechanical efficiency while Isabel stares at painted saints on the ceiling and tries to separate consciousness from what is happening to her flesh. The pain is immediate and overwhelming, but worse is the understanding that this is only the beginning. When Philip finishes, he withdraws without a word and departs as if concluding any other obligation, leaving Isabel alone with blood on the sheets and pain that will serve as permanent reminder of her status. In the morning, those blood-stained sheets are displayed publicly. Her most private agony becomes political triumph. Court officials examine the evidence and declare themselves satisfied that the French princess came to marriage with virginity intact. Spain celebrates while Isabel lies hollow-eyed, understanding finally and completely that she is no longer a person. She has become a function, a biological system designed to manufacture heirs. The years blur together in duty and despair. Isabel learns Spanish court protocol, when to speak, when to stay silent, how to arrange her face in pious contentment while her spirit withers. She becomes fluent in Spanish, but her native French becomes a secret language she speaks only to herself in dark hours when sleep refuses to come, and memories of home feel like visitations from ghosts. Philip remains a stranger, visiting her bed when duty demands an heir but bringing the same mechanical devotion he shows attending Mass. He never asks about her comfort, her feelings, her interior life. She searches his face during these encounters for some flicker of humanity, some recognition that she exists beyond biological function, but finds only cold assessment of a man cataloging possessions. The pregnancies begin within months, and with them comes suffering that makes her previous trials seem gentle. Isabel's body, still developing, struggles to carry children conceived in violation rather than love. Her first pregnancy ends in miscarriage, noted in court records as disappointment, a failure of the queen to fulfill her obligation. No one asks about her grief. Court physicians examine expelled tissue with clinical interest, debating what went wrong, how to improve outcomes next time. Isabel grieves alone, without comfort from women who might understand, without consolation from religious advisors who see her suffering as anything more than obstacle to heir production. The miscarriages continue with devastating regularity, each prompting searches for blame that never center on the obvious, that she's too young, too traumatized, too systematically destroyed to carry pregnancies to term. Physicians prescribe bloodletting, herbal remedies, spiritual interventions. They blame her French blood, her melancholic disposition, her insufficient piety. They never consider that perhaps the problem is forcing a child to bear children. Between pregnancies, Isabel finds small refuges. Music lessons provide hours where her fingers on lute strings can speak emotions her voice is not allowed to express. Hours in the chapel offer space to pray in French to a God who might still remember the girl she used to be. Stolen moments with kinder ladies-in-waiting provide fragments of warmth, though always carefully, always aware that every word might be reported. At 17, Isabel carries another pregnancy, and this one progresses further than the others. Hope becomes more dangerous than despair. Court physicians monitor constantly. Religious advisors pray publicly, though Isabel knows they're praying for the child, specifically for a male heir. Her body, finally mature enough, nurtures the developing life with determination born of desperation. Philip visits more frequently now, ostensibly checking her welfare, but actually assessing progress of his potential heir. For the first time since leaving France, Isabel dares to hope, not for happiness, but for the peace that might come from finally succeeding at the only test that matters. Labor, when it comes, is agony no one prepared her for. 18 hours of pain in a chamber filled with strangers. Physicians, midwives, court officials waiting to verify the gender of the heir she spent a year producing. Spanish protocol requires witnesses to prevent any possibility of substitution. Isabel screams in French during the worst contractions, the language of childhood returning when conscious control dissolves. But no one understands the words pouring from her lips, and no one cares about her suffering except as it might interfere with successful delivery. She begs for her mother in phrases that mean nothing to Spanish ears. She pleads with God in French prayers that sound like gibberish to physicians who view labor as medical event rather than human crisis. When the child finally emerges after 18 hours that leave Isabel delirious with blood loss, it's a daughter. The disappointment in the room is immediate and crushing. A girl, useful for future alliances, but not the male heir Philip desperately needs. Isabel holds her daughter for mere moments before the infant is taken for examination, her value already being calculated by men who see babies as political assets rather than miracles. More pregnancies follow, each taking something irreplaceable from Isabel's weakening body. More daughters. More disappointments. More nights bleeding in chambers where her pain is recorded as data rather than suffering. By 1568, at 22 years old, Isabel has the physical constitution of a woman twice her age. Chronic illness, repeated pregnancies, and relentless pressure have carved deep lines around eyes that once sparkled with curiosity. She moves through corridors like a ghost haunting her own life. Her final pregnancy begins in 1568, and Isabel knows with certainty that comes from a body pushed beyond all limits that she will not survive. Labor lasts nearly 2 days while physicians debate procedures and officials send urgent messages to Philip. When another daughter, Catherine Michelle, finally arrives, Isabel manages to whisper a few words of love before hemorrhaging begins that no medical intervention can stop. As fever consumes her and consciousness fades, she drifts between the Spanish palace where she's dying and memories of French gardens where a 13-year-old girl once played with dolls. In her final moments, she speaks not to Spanish courtiers surrounding her deathbed, but to the mother she lost years before leaving France. Her last words, whispered in the French that had become her secret language of resistance, are heartbreakingly simple. Je suis fatiguée. I am tired. On October 3, 1568, Isabel de Valois dies at 22, 8 years after arriving in Spain as a terrified teenager. She is buried with royal honors, but the tears shed are diplomatic rather than genuine. Philip begins planning his next marriage alliance before her body grows cold. History remembers her as a footnote, the French queen who failed to provide male heirs. But we should remember her as something else entirely, a child sacrificed on the altar of political necessity, whose short life illuminates the human cost of treating people as instruments rather than souls. The tragedy of Isabel de Valois is not just that she died young. It's that she was never allowed to live at all. Somewhere in the archives, if you know where to look, you can still find letters written in her hand. French words carefully formed, growing shakier with each passing year, like someone slowly forgetting how to write in their own language. They read like messages in bottles thrown from a sinking ship, reaching toward a shore that no longer existed.